Yeah, you already did.
Is it started? Okay, so we're going over Unit 15, agencies in real estate. Agency in real estate. So agency is the relationship between a real estate licensee, who would be considered the agent, and the parties represented by the agent in the real estate transaction, the client. Okay, so the client would be the parties represented in the transaction by the agent. Agency is governed by common law. Common law, we have two types of laws, right? Common law, and what's the other one? What? Statutory. Okay, so just so to help you differentiate between the two, common law are rules of society, usually from court cases. Okay, usually from court cases. So if they're the rules of society, and usually sometimes court cases will dictate those rules. So if Ellen got picked up for speeding in a 55 zone and she was going 56, the judge may say, Ellen, that's not a good example, but we may say 56 is not enough for you to get punished. Once that court case is documented, somebody else can use that. That would be considered common law. So the next guy that got picked up and for going 1 mile an hour over, he could say, yeah, but there was a case in court where Ellen Chapman was going 1 mile over and they said that that didn't constitute a violation. See how common law is created? Rules of society, a lot of times by court cases. Statutory laws, how are statutory laws created? By what?
By the government, I think.
They would be by legislation of government agencies. The legislation is when there's an act in Congress or an act in the House and they vote on it. So statutory laws are created by legislation. Common law is created by judges and typical practices. So does that help, Ray? How do I pronounce that? The differentiate between the two. An agent owns the principal loyalty. Okay, the principal agent relationship revolved from the master-servant relationship under England common law, in that the relationship, the servant owned absolute loyalty to the master. The loyalty replaces the servant's personal interest, as well as the loyalty and servant may be to others. So the agency relationship was from English law, where the servant had absolute loyalty to the master no matter what, even if it wasn't in the servant's best interest. Okay, and it's the same with the agency relationship with a licensee and their client. You have absolute loyalty to your client, even if it's a conflict of interest with your own person. Now, what would be an example of that? A buyer wants to make an offer 150 on a house. House is listed for 170. You make a bigger commission if you got 170, right? If that guy wants to make an offer of 150, you have an obligation to present that offer, even though if you offered 170, it would be more in your best interest because you'd make more money. Does that make sense? So know that the agent owns the principal, and the principal is the client, Samantha, loyalty. And loyalty is a hard thing to find this day and age, ain't it? In anything. Jacob's laughing back here. But you as a real estate agent have to give that client that loyalty. Let's talk about the different agency concepts, okay? Agency refers to the strict, defined legal relationship between the principal and the agent. And who's the principal? Client. Good job, Lex. An agent is a person authorized to act on behalf of another in a real estate. In real estate, the broker is the agent and shares responsibility with his agents. Subagent is an agent of an agent. Because of the extension of the agent's authority, is also an agent to the principal. So we don't practice subagency very much here, but Ellen is the broker. Lauren is her client. Lexi can be, even though she's working with Vonnie, she can be a subagent for the seller and not represent Vonnie. So she could be a subagent for the seller, right? She could be a buyer's agent for Vonnie. One or the other. One or the other. Remember we said the different roles an agent could play? They could represent the seller. They could represent the buyer. They could represent both as a dual agent, right? They could represent neither as a transaction licensee, or an agent could represent the seller as a subagent if it's not their listing and there's another agent representing the seller. That's how we used to do it. It's not done very often anymore. The principal is who the authority of the agent gives the authority to the agent to act on their behalf. Fiduciary responsibility, this is very important, is one in which the agent is placed in a position of special trust and confidence to the principal. So you have a fiduciary responsibility, and we'll get into a fiduciary responsibility and what that means. But you have that. That's a special trust. Okay. A client is the principal to whom the agent gives advice and counsel. The customer is a third party or non-represented consumer to whom some level of service is provided and who is entitled to fairness and honesty. So even if the person's not your client, okay, because if he's your client, you have a fiduciary responsibility, right? Seneca? Shake your head, yes. So even if they're not your client, they're just a customer, you haven't formed that agency relationship with them yet. Maybe you show them a house, but they don't want to hire you as a buyer's agent. Okay? They're still your customer, right? So you owe them fairness and honesty. You don't owe them some of the duties of fiduciary responsibility, but I'm sure we'll get into those in more detail here. A non-agent would be, we consider that a transaction licensee. He is a middleman between the buyer and the seller who insists one or both parties with the transaction, but doesn't represent either party. Okay, so I would know those. I'm sure they're spelled out in the book. A real estate licensing law defines agency practices when a consumer is the recipient of any real estate service and may engage a broker to provide those services under a variety of working relationships we just went over, not all of which cast the broker as the agent or rise to the level of an agency relationship. So that agency relationship, Christine, takes you to a different level with that consumer. Okay. So an agent can represent both the buyer and the seller. Okay. So now let's talk. I talked about fiduciary relationship, right? Let's talk a little bit about the duties. You need to know these for the test, and you need to know these for real life. What page are they in the book?
Starts at 249.
249. So make some notes on this bad boy. Okay. So these are the 6 fiduciary duties of an agent to their principal. Now, to be a principal or a client, you have to have some type of what? Agency relationship with that person. So Lexi says to Vonnie says, Lex, I want to buy a house. Lex says, fine. let's sign a buyer agency relationship. As soon as they sign that buyer agency agreement, Lexi now has a fiduciary responsibility to Bonnie. Ellen is representing Lauren in listing her house. Soon as Lauren signs that listing agreement, in that agreement, it will spell out their agency relationship. In both situations, for Lexi and Ellen, they have these 6 fiduciary responsibilities. Okay, so know them. Know them back and forth, please. They will be on the test. Accounting. You have a responsibility to account for all funds received. You have a responsibility to give copies of all documents provided to the parties. And you have to retain those for 3 years. So know that. When you do a sale, you have to keep those records for 3 years. Okay? That may be on the test. How long do you have to keep records? 3 years. How long do you have to keep a consumer notice? Huh?
6 months.
Now, if you, no, because let's say Lexi shows Bonnie a house. And Bonnie signs a consumer notice, but doesn't enter into a relationship with Lexi. Then that consumer notice would have to be kept for 6 months. Once they enter into a relationship and you have that fiduciary responsibility, then you got to keep those records for 3 years. Okay? That's the important thing to know about accounting. Is not only do you have to account for their funds, but you have to give everybody copies of all documents, and you have to retain those documents for 3 years. Okay? You have to retain those documents for 3 years. Confidentiality. An agent must not reveal information that would harm the client's position. Confidentiality extends beyond the expiration of the listing. Confidentiality. Bonnie or Lauren would be a good example, tells Ellen, listen, I want to list this house for 180, but I have a mortgage for 150 on it. So if you can get me 180, that'll be great. But I have a mortgage for 150. Okay. Ellen has to keep that confident, right? Their listing agreement expires. Lauren lists with Azaria. Okay. Now Lauren told Ellen in confidence what her mortgage amount was, right? So now she has that property listed with Azaria. Ellen has a buyer. Even though this agency relationship is gone, Ellen can't tell another buyer, make her an offer of 155 because I know she has a mortgage on it at 150. That confidentiality that's formed with a fiduciary relationship goes beyond any relationship agreement you would have. Okay? Same thing could happen to Bonnie. Bonnie could be working with Lexi, have a buyer agency agreement with her. Bonnie could say, hey, I got to be out of my house by the end of the month. I'll give you 2 weeks to find me a house. Lexi doesn't find her a house. Bonnie says, our agreement's over. It was only for 2 weeks. Then Lexi lists another home. Bonnie is now working with Samantha. They make an offer. Lex tells her seller, don't worry about it. Play hardball with her. I know she got it. Oh, she don't like to touch. You see that? See how she pulled away from me? Play hardball with her. I know she has to be out of her house in 2 weeks. You can't do that. She told you that in confidence under the fiduciary responsibilities because you had a relationship. Now, until you sign that buyer agency or listing agreement or have a contract with them, you have to make them aware, and that's where the consumer notice comes in, Jake. Because you're making them aware with the consumer notice, anything they tell you may not be in confidence unless they sign an agreement with you. Doesn't it make sense? Common sense stuff. Care. The principals expect the agent's skill and expertise in real estate to be superior to that of the average Joe, and to use that knowledge on the principal's behalf. I always say to people when they hire me to sell their house, you're not hiring me to sell your house. You're hiring me for the experience I have accumulated over the last 35 years. Or a new agent, you could say, you're not hiring me to sell your house. You're hiring me from the experience and knowledge not only I have, but my manager and my broker, because we work together as a team to get your house sold. Does that make sense? So, obedience. Act according to the principal's lawful instructions. So, obedience doesn't mean that Vaughnie can call Lex up and say, it's Friday night at 10 o'clock and say, I want to see that house Saturday morning. That's not what we're talking about with obedience. Maybe Lex's schedule won't permit that. But obedience would be, let's say Vaughnie said to Lex, I want to make an offer on that house. Here's the offer. I'd like you to write up and submit it. That's what we're talking about there. Does that make sense? Okay. Loyalty. We talked about that. Place the principal's interest before else, including the agent's. And disclosure. Information of principal. You have to inform the principal of all the facts or information of the transaction. A legal requirement to disclose. You have a legal requirement to disclose material defects. That supersedes the obligation of loyalty to the client. So if it supersedes it. So Ellen lists Lauren's house, and Lauren tells Ellen, you know what? 50 years ago, there was a flood here. My grandfather was living in a house that flooded the basement. And Ellen says, well, Lauren, you got to put that on a seller disclosure. And Lauren says, no, she don't want to. Okay. Ellen now has an obligation to disclose that to any prospective buyers. And that supersedes the obligation of loyalty to her client if it's a material defect. Does that make sense? Was that clear? Hey, Lise. Don't worry. We're okay. We're on unit 15. Probably page. What page? Give her a hand. What page?
Fiduciary duties are an agent's responsibility to their client. The client is owed loyalty and trust. The agent must act in and represent the best interests of their client. These responsibilities are not required for customers. Customers must sign an agency agreement to become a client. There are several types of agency relationships, and we will dig into those in the next section. But first, the fiduciary duties an agent owes to their client include loyalty, obedience, full disclosure, confidentiality, accountability, reasonable care, and diligence. The agent must provide support within legal boundaries and follow the directions of the client. The agent must provide disclosures to the client about the property and any material relationships between any parties associated with the transaction. When representing sellers, agents must present all offers they have received on a property. The agent cannot pick and choose which offers to present, and they cannot hide an offer from the seller. Agents are also obligated to keep any confidential facts about the seller private. If the seller does not want the buyer to know why they are selling or the lowest amount they are willing to accept, that must be kept private. With that said, anything that has to be disclosed by law will still be disclosed. The seller cannot hide facts about the property from the buyer if they are required to be disclosed. Confidential information would be anything that could harm the client in negotiations. Agents are also required to represent their clients in the best light. Agents should take time with the seller to develop a plan for showings and how the house needs to be presented, as well as advertise the property accurately.
Okay, I'm going to stop that right there because I just picked up that those speakers weren't working properly. It was coming from the see if that makes a difference.
Fiduciary duties are an agent's.
Sorry about that, guys. It's hard to be on top of all this technology, man. But you got to be. You know, when I started in the business, I didn't even know how to use a computer. I didn't even have computers. Let me adjust this sound. I went to Westmoreland County Community College, took a test, took a class.
To their client. The client is owed loyalty and trust. The agent must act in and represent
Better, huh?
the best interests of their client. These responsibilities are not required for customers. Customers
Okay.
must sign an agency agreement.
Work in progress. That's one thing about technology, man. It's always changing, and you got to be with it, and you got to change with it. And at our office, we work together as a team because sometimes, like for example, one of my agents, Laura Harris, she, you know, we have this one program that will send an email out to people, like for the holidays, and you can set them up, and it'll automatically when first day of spring comes. You guys ever get an email like that from me? First day of spring, probably the last one. What was the last holiday? New Year's or Christmas. Sets them up. So Laura was digging into it. She knew more than I did or Cindy. So we had a group meeting and we all dug into it. Laura helped us. We went and got some help from our corporate office. And at the end of the day, we were experts at setting up these e-blasts. And there was agents that have been with me for 20 some years, weren't using it. And when they seen other younger people using it, they wanted to come to the training to get trained on it. And it's just a great tool. So you're always learning in this business. You're always learning every day. And just like me, I'm taking notes here. Some stuff that maybe I haven't talked to my team about for a while, and I'll bring it to the next sales meeting we have. Okay, so disclosure, and I'm going to go back to disclosure. So what are the 6 duties? Give me one of them. Care. What's the other one? What is it? Loyalty. What else? You can look at the book. Obedience. Okay. Confidentiality. Accounting. And that even accounts for accounting. How long do you have to keep records if you sign an agreement with them? 3 years. How about the consumer notice? How long, Jared, do you have to keep the consumer notice? 6 months if you don't have an agreement. Okay, and then disclosure. Boy, don't you wish you could have these? I wish I could get these fiduciary responsibilities with my wife, huh? She wouldn't go for the obedience part. I can tell you that right now. So disclosure is you have to inform the principal of all the facts or information of the transaction. So disclosure not only means disclosing defects with the house, but you have to keep your client abreast. Hey, we're going to get our home inspection tomorrow. Are you ready to go? Did you make mortgage application within 10 days? Hey, they're going to do the appraisal. Did you give the lender the check? Hey, we're getting ready for closing. Did you get the insurance policy in place? Did you put the lender's name down as the mortgagee? Can you send that mortgagee clause over from the insurance company to the lender to make sure it's right? That's all disclosure, what we're talking about. Then it says you have a legal requirement to disclose material defects, and that supersedes the obligation of loyalty to your client. So if Ellen knows that there's a defect with that property and Lauren doesn't disclose it, Ellen has an obligation to disclose it. Okay? This includes the following disclosures. Once an offer is accepted, must present future offers unless instructed in writing not to. So Ellen gets an offer on Lauren's house. Unless Lauren instructs her not to bring any more offers, Ellen has to keep giving her offers even if it's under contract. Okay? All offers, unless directed by the seller to not present, have to be presented. So all offers, unless directed by the seller to not present in after one has been accepted. So if your seller tells you the offer's been accepted, I don't want you to write up any other offers, then, or present any other offers, then you don't have to present any other offers. Okay. The identity of the prospective purchaser, which may include any relationship they may have with the agent or a agent has with them, such as when a licensee or a relative is the purchaser. So if Lexi is selling Luke, her boyfriend, a house, and she makes an offer to Ellen, she may want to say, hey, Ellen, I just want to let you know I'm representing Luke and he's my boyfriend. Or I'm representing Fred and he's my husband or my relative. Because they're going to find out anyway. So why not disclose it up front? And especially if Lexi is the one purchasing it and she's a licensee, you have to definitely disclose that. You can't disclose the purchaser's ability to complete the sale or offer a higher price. If Vonnie tells Lex, I'm willing to go 150, but I want to offer 125, I can go 150. I'm pre-approved for 150. Lex can't tell Ellen, hey, Ellen, he's offering 125, but she'll go higher. Okay? Must disclose any personal interest in the property. So if you're selling your own personal property, you have to disclose that. These are just common sense things, aren't they, Christine? Any interest the agent has in the buyer, such as a brokerage agreement to manage the property after the buyer purchases it. The buyer's intent to resell the property for a profit. So if Vonnie wants to resell that property for a profit after she buys it, I don't think Lex can disclose that to the seller. And any incorrect market value of the property. So if the guy wants to list for 200 and it's only worth 100, you have an obligation to disclose to him you're high. We may try, but you're high. Let me see if I could. In disclosing environmental hazards, the licensee should ensure that their clients are aware of any potential environmental health hazards. Federal law requires disclosure of lead-based paint. If the property was built when?
1970.
Prior to when? What year for lead-based paint?
79?
No.
Should have been.
You're close.
69.
No.
You're 80. You said before the year before.
Built prior to 1978.
1978.
You were close, Ray.
Yeah,
78.
it's right there.
78 trombones in the big parade.
Good job.
I don't know.
Good job. We're doing karaoke after this, right?
I'm not a big karaoke guy, but I can sing some karaoke if I have a couple captains in me. The seller of 1 to 4 family dwellings are required to complete a seller disclosure statement by law. You need to know that, Jared. So if I own a 20-unit apartment building, do I have to complete a seller disclosure? Yes or no? Chime it out. 20-unit apartment building, do I have to disclose any defects? No. I don't have to fill out a disclosure. You still should, one, disclose defects, okay? But you don't have to fill out the disclosure form. Only if it's a 1 to 4 family dwelling. are you required by law, Jake, to fill out the property disclosure statement? What's Bitcoin doing today?
It's going up last.
It's been up the last few days, huh?
Yeah, it's kind of down a little bit. What's it say?
I like talking with you about that kind of stuff.
Ford stock up.
What's that?
Ford's up pretty good today.
Did it jump a little bit? You know what? I don't follow Ford. But I know that it was up and then it came down. And they're pretty good on these. They're going to be kicking out these electric vehicles.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
They already have the trucks in.
Yeah, they have the F-150 Lightning, I think, coming out. Okay. No disclosure is required for commercial, industrial, or agricultural sales. So, Lex, if I'm selling 100 acres of raw land, do I have to have the seller fill out a seller disclosure?
I don't remember, yeah.
No. Sellers of 1 to 4 family dwellings are required. They're not required for commercial, industrial, or agricultural sales.
What's a
So-
1 to 4 family dwelling?
Either a single family house like we live in, or a duplex, 2 families in 1 house, or a fourplex with 4 families living.
So would you ask me just a bunch of land?
Yeah, I asked you if they're selling 100 acres, do they have to fill out a seller disclosure statement? No. Do they have to disclose any defects? Yes. But they don't have to do the seller disclosure. And buyers are responsible for the discovery to protect their own interests by asking questions and doing testing. Okay? Let's talk about client versus customer care. We talked a little bit about this. The client is the principal, correct? We all got that down, right, Christine? The agent is the party hired. The client is entitled to, even if they're not the customer, even if they're not a client, is entitled to factual information, but no fiduciary responsibilities. So again, Lauren signs a listing agreement with Ellen. That's going to be their contract where she's contracting Ellen to represent her. And now there's a fiduciary responsibility, right? Vonnie says, hey, Lex, show me the house. Lex does a consumer notice gig with her and then says, Vonnie, I would like you to sign a buyer agency agreement. Vonnie says, Lex, I don't want to sign any agreement. I don't want to be obligated to work with you. I just want to see this house. So you're not a client because you wouldn't sign that agreement. The agreements would ties you in. But you still are owed. Lexi has to give you factual information and has to be honest with you. Do you think people look at houses without signing agreements with agents to represent them? Every day. Every day. Sometimes as an agent, I don't even know if I want them as a client. I'll show them my listing, and if they buy it, fine. If not, I may not want to. Because if I talk them into, or if I discuss with them about signing a buyer agency agreement, and they do, now I have a fiduciary responsibility to them. Customer level service, reasonable care and skill, honesty, fair dealing, disclose all facts the licensee knows or should be expected to know that materially affect the value or desirability of the property. So even though Vonnie didn't sign that buyer agency agreement, so she's what, a client or a customer if she doesn't sign an agreement? Customer. Lexi knows of a problem with the house. She still has to disclose that. She still has to disclose that. And state law may require additional services and disclosures. So let's talk about the creation and the termination of agency. The principal must delegate authority and the agent must consent to the act. So when they're signing this buyer agency agreement with Vonnie and Lex, because Lex finally talked her into letting her represent Vonnie, Vonnie has to delegate authority to Lexi, and Lexi must consent and say, okay, to act. Typically, that's not in writing. The relationship must be consensual. The agent has duties, fiduciary duties. Give me one of the fiduciary duties. Care? Give me another one. What? Accounting, loyalty, disclosure. What I want Nina to have, obedience, or really what she wants me to have, obedience. And confidentiality. The principal must cooperate with and not hinder the agent's best efforts and must compensate in accordance to the terms of the agency relationship. So Lauren signs the listing agreement with Ellen, okay, to sell her house. Ellen got a buyer, wants to see it. Lauren said, today's not a good day. When is a good day, Lauren? Well, I don't know. I'll let you know. How about tomorrow? How about the next day? How about next week? When can I show the house? Lauren's hindering Ellen from selling the house, right? Can't do that. You can't do that. You have to cooperate. Now, does that mean Vonnie has to make, on the buyer side of the table, does that mean Vonnie has to make good offers? No. She can offer whatever she wants. The biggest problem we have with cooperation is typically with a seller. Sometimes when we're selling investment properties for a seller, and if it's 1 to 4 units, what does the seller have to do in writing? Disclose. So sometimes we sign a listing agreement with somebody who has an investment property and they have tenants. And the tenant is uncooperative. We want to show the house. They never want to let us in. When we show the house, they're beating the house up. You know, you have to go back to your client and say, hey, man, you got to cooperate with me. You better have a talk with that tenant. You have to talk to the tenant. I'll never forget this one landlord. His name was Dan. The tenant was giving us a hard time. We had the house under contract. Danny hung out at the driveway in the grass. 11 o'clock at night, the tenant came home. Dan jumped out, threatened to beat his ass if he didn't cooperate. Now, that's not legal. He could have went to jail for that, but
Did it work?
it worked. So let's talk about the different agency relationships. And that's a true story. Not against well, I didn't know about it until after it happened. I said, oh, Dan, you can't do that. You can't do that. Gotta put you in jail. You can have an expressed agency. What page are we on in the book?
255.
250. Man, we're just burning through, huh, Lauren? You never thought you'd see 3 chapters in the morning,
No,
did you?
No.
I told you, man. But we're not going too fast, are we?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you okay, Seneca? What page? 240, 255? Okay. Expressed agency. The parties state the term of the agreement and express their intentions either orally or in writing. In Pennsylvania, agency agreements must be in writing, but for the national test, if you're taking a national, Garrett, and it says an expressed agency, can the parties express their intents orally, not in writing? Yes. Pennsylvania? No. Okay. Agency is implied by the actions of the parties rather than a written contract they signed. in an implied agency relationship. So an implied agency relationship may be if Lexi is showing Vonnie all these houses, and Lex says, I'll do a good job representing you, Vaughn. Make sure Vonnie said, boy, Lex, I'm glad that you're representing me. But they don't sign anything. That could be considered an implied relationship. Now, in Pennsylvania, it's not binding or legal, but nationally, yes, it is. Okay. In real estate, the actions of the parties may create an agency relationship unintentionally, inadvertently, or by accident, where none was intended, leading to an undisclosed dual agency. So know that an undisclosed dual agency is where they form an implied agency unintentionally, just by the actions. Okay. Now that was a little tricky. Christine, we finally got to something tricky, didn't we?
Mm-hmm.
Good. Because you guys were getting way too comfortable. The source of compensation does not determine agency. The written agreement should state how the agent is being compensated and explain all the alternatives. For example, Vonnie finally agrees. Okay, Lex, you can sign, I'll sign a buyer agency agreement with you. And Lexi, in that buyer agency agreement, this is done very typically, states, okay, Vaughn, I want 3.5% if I sell you any house, regardless what the seller is willing to pay. Now, Lexi sells Vonnie Ellen's house. Vonnie has a co-broke fee of 3.5%. Ellen has it. So Ellen has the listing, Lauren's house, and in the listing, she puts in a multiple listing service. You bring me a buyer and you agents, I'll give you 3.5%. Lex sells Vonnie that house. Ellen's seller is paying Lexi's fee, even though Lexi is representing who? Vonnie. So whoever's paying the compensation does not determine the agency relationship. Okay? It doesn't determine it. So you could have that agency relationship with Vonnie and somebody else can pay that fee. The seller can pay that fee. And Vonnie doesn't have to kick anything out. Now, if you had a buyer agency agreement with Vaughn saying you were going to pay 3.5% Lex, and Ellen was only given 2.5%, then the seller would pay 2.5%, and Vonnie would have to kick up the other 1%. Okay? The source of compensation does not determine agency. Only a written document determines agency. And that written document between the buyers is called what document? Oh my God. Oh my God. What's it called? I've been talking about it all morning. What's the written document between the agent and the buyer if they decide to form an agency relationship?
The agency agreement?
No. What's the name of the agency agreement?
Express agency?
What's the name of the agreement the buyer would sign with an agent to hire the agent to work for them? Lise?
I'm Sarah.
I'm sorry, Sarah.
That's okay.
I called you Lisa twice. Lisa's sitting beside you.
Listing agreement?
No, listing agreements between the agent and the seller.
Okay.
What's the agreement called between the agent and the buyer?
Consumer notice?
No.
Buyer's agency.
Oh, who said that?
Yeah, buyer's agency.
Buyer agency agreement. Buyer agency agreement. I mean, between the buyer and the agent. Listing agreement between the seller and the agent. Okay? So only a written document can determine agency. I'm sorry, Sarah. I called you Lise twice too.
Okay.
Hey, not for nothing, Azaria, I finally got her name down. And we're on day 7, huh, Azaria? You bring donuts, baby. I'll remember your name. You just, and you know what?
Wait.
I still got a little bit of that donut left.
Bring them.
Huh?
He said I finally got her name right. Right, Lazaria.
Lazaria.
You just messed it up.
Azaria.
Yeah.
No more donuts, sir.
Oh, my.
Maybe day
Hey, man, I'll tell you what. Everybody got their faults. So how do you terminate Azaria? I'm sorry about that. How do you terminate an agency agreement? Completion. Lauren hires Ellen to sell her house. What type of an agreement would they use?
Buyers, sellers. I wasn't listening, I'm sorry.
Lauren hires Ellen to list her house. What agreement would they use? Listing agreement. Vonnie, Jesus Christ. Vonnie hires Lexi to represent her to buy a house. What kind of agreement do they use? Buyer agency. Okay. So completion would be if Ellen sold Lauren's house and they consummated the transaction. Now the agency relationship is terminated. But Ellen still owes Lauren a level of what? Forever.
Confidentiality.
Confidentiality. Who said that? You go, girlfriend. Confidentiality. So completion, performance, or fulfillment are all words that they can use on the test to say that the agreement was completed. Death or incapacity of either party would terminate the relationship. Okay. Destruction or condemnation of the property. Lauren's property that Ellen has listed burns to the ground. Agency relationships done. Okay. Unless they agree that Ellen's still going to sell it. I sold a house. There was a terrible fire in Ross Straver right across from my office. And the house was burned terribly. Terribly. Couldn't live in it anymore. And they hired me and we sold the property. We sold it to an investor who came in and completely renovated it and sold it. Or condemnation. If the state comes, condemnation is where the state takes your property, right? State takes your property, your agreement's over. Termination of the terms. All written agreements for agency relationships have an expiration date. So Lex, you tell Vaughn you want her to sign a buyer agency. She finally says yes. She finally says yes. You have to put in that agreement the start date and the end date. Same thing with you on a listing. Now, listings cannot exceed 1 year. Buyer agencies probably can't either, but listings definitely can. Okay, so maybe Lauren says, I'll give you 30 days. Maybe Lauren, you put 30 days in the agreement. After 30 days, if you don't get the house sold, or if Vonnie gives you a 30-day buyer agency agreement, after 30 days, you don't find her house, agreement's terminated. Agreement's terminated. Mutual agreement by all parties. Lauren says to Ellen, you're not really doing a good job. I don't want you as an agent. Ellen says to Lauren, I'm okay with it. Let's terminate the agreement. So even though you're not to the term yet, if you both agree, you can terminate the agreement. Breach by one of the parties, operation of law. Wait, what would I mean by, Jace, operation of the law? Give me an example on if somebody had a house listed, how operation of law would terminate the agreement.
That'd be like I get foreclosed on. I'm trying to sell my house.
Bam.
Foreclosed on.
Lauren gets foreclosed on, that's an operation of law, that terminates the agreement. Okay? Good stuff, man. This is just all good stuff. I'm so excited for you guys. Really, this is pretty logical stuff that if you just read it and take the test. So I'm moving kind of quickly, but you guys can handle it.
At a time when most universities look like this, the founders of Wolt,
Implication based upon the customs or practice of the trade, or the conduct of the principal. An agent is a party who acts for and in place of a principal. The principal is bound by the acts of the agent. The law of agency defines the rights, duties, and responsibilities of all legal parties. An agency can be created by express agreement, whether oral or written, implication based upon the customs or practice of the trade, or the conduct of the principal. Under the legal doctrine of estoppel, the principal is prohibited from denying the existence of a properly constituted agency. If the agency relationship changes at any time during the transaction, the change must be disclosed in writing, and the party must consent to the change. As a real estate agent, the term fiduciary relationship comes up on a regular basis. A fiduciary relationship is a legal relationship that creates a position.
There you go. I'm looking for that acronym.
Change. As a real estate agent, the term fiduciary relationship comes up on a regular basis. A fiduciary.
Okay. Sorry, I was talking about that donut. Where'd I go as soon as we got done? As soon as I played that video. Okay. So, a code. So we're going to try to remember a fiduciary relationship, right? So what unit are we on, guys? Unit 15?
Yeah.
Fiduciary relationship.
In the book in the one corner.
What page?
I have no pages.
249 is a code, C-O-L-D. So that's how we're going to remember it. Okay? A code. Like you got a code, right? A code. What's A stand for? So when you're taking a test, right? And it says, what are the 5 fiduciary responsibilities? I would write on a piece of scratch paper, A-C-O-L-D. Okay? And then I know A is for accountability. What would C be for? O? Obedience. L? Loyalty. D? Disclosure. A code. Fiduciary responsibility. A code.
Is a legal relationship.
I got bitched at last night from my wife because we have a shower that has a steam shower in it. So sometimes when I put the steam on and then I turn the shower on, I turn the nozzle to the left. And then when she opens and then I shut the shower off. When she comes in to take a shower and she turns the water on, because I have it pointing to the left, it bounces off the wall and goes out on the carpet. She says, please, Tom, be obedient to me and don't put the shower like facing against the wall.
That would be
Because she would be cold if she has to step. She'd be cold. I don't know. Cold. I don't know. True story.
Position of trust and confidence. The acronym ACOLD will help you remember your duties in a fiduciary relationship. As an agent, you must A, be accountable, C, use care and skill,
You need to know this for the test,
obey
guys.
legal instructions, L, be loyal to your client, and D, disclose all pertinent information. Loyalty means the principal's interest must come before anyone else's. It means keeping confidential information confidential, which is any information that would affect the bargaining position of the client. An example of this would be not to disclose that the client is going through a divorce.
Okay. Let's talk about the different types of agency. Okay. Now, you can have a universal agency. Universal. You're empowered to do anything the principal can do personally. Not usually found in real estate transactions. But what would be, so if a universal agent, Seneca, the person would be empowered to do anything that the principal can do, where do you think that would come into play? Give me an example of how somebody could have the power to do anything the principal can do. The power.
It's like a POA.
Power of attorney. So if a power of attorney, I have a power of attorney for my mother, so I can do anything my mother can do with that power of attorney. I would be a universal agent, Lex, for Sutu. And today's her birthday, by the way. 85 years old. God bless her. General agent. But usually that's not found in real estate. So typically in real estate, we don't create a universal agency with a client that we can do anything that they can do. Typically that's not done. Okay. A general agent represents the principal in a broad range of matters related to a particular business or activity. Maybe a property manager would be considered a general agent, or a real estate salesperson who represents their broker. So that's not anything, but as far as the real estate salesperson and broker's relationship, it would be everything related to selling and listing homes. Or a property manager could be anything pertaining to that particular property. Finding tenants, running credit checks, making repairs, and so forth. So with general agent, a universal agent, everybody look up to the stars. There's no stars here, but look. You can do anything, right? The general, isn't it commercial that guy sells insurance, the general, for auto insurance? Well, think about that. Don't the guy need insurance on the apartment building? So if you're managing an apartment building, you would be a general agent, okay? And then there's the special agent. I always say Lexi is special. She's authorized to represent the principal in one specific act or business transaction under detailed instructions. A real estate broker acting under a listing agreement is a special agent. A agent or broker representing a buyer under a buyer agency agreement would be a special agent. So universal, not used in real estate. Look up at the stars, anything that person can do, you can do. The general agency, you're going to remember that general on TV, right? Who's the guy that's in those general commercials all the time? The basketball star. Jack? Yeah. Ain't he in those commercials all the time? Okay. And he's sitting in the house and those people are coming. Just imagine that house was an apartment building. The general agent would be for that client to manage that specific property, or an agent representing the broker. And a special agent would be either a agent. Well, it would be special if you got a listing right now, Ellen, because you know why? Listings are hard to find. So if you got a listing, you would be a special agent to Lauren. Okay? Did that help a little bit with those three? Because those are a little bit off the wall kind of terms, right? In Pennsylvania, The Real Estate Licensing and Registration Act, RARA, permits a broker to act as an agent for the buyer, an agent for the seller, a dual agent, or a transaction licensee. The broker must decide which relationship to offer, which means deciding for whom the company will provide client level versus customer level services. So if I'm an agent for the buyer, am I client level or customer level services? Agent for the buyer, client or customer? Client, because you have an agency relationship. Agent for the seller or landlord, client or customer? And remember, the only way an agency relationship can be formed is in writing. What did I hear, Christine? I didn't say nothing, she said. Okay, let me walk you through it, Christine. If you have an agreement, a written agreement with the seller, that forms an agency relationship. So if you have an agency relationship with somebody, then that's your client. Okay? So Ellen would be Lauren. Lauren would be Ellen's client because they have a listing agreement. Vonnie, because she signed that buyer agency agreement, Lexi would be the client of Lexi. And then she has all this fiduciary responsibilities, right? A transaction license, a dual agent, you're representing both. A transaction licensee, client or customer? Customer. Why? Transaction licensee, you don't have any
Agreement.
agency relationship with that person. Yes. Okay. We're getting there, man. We're getting there, guys. I'm excited.
There's a lot in this chapter.
What's that?
There's a lot in this chapter.
Yeah.
I'll eat. I'm hungry.
Would you like to stop right here for lunch, guys?
Yes.
Okay. So let's do a half hour, and we're on slide number 19, and we'll get started.
Wait. Do any